Queens of Europe. Christina of Sweden. Queen Christina of Sweden defied gender and religious norms to live her life in her own way, dressing as a man, loving women, and eventually giving up the throne to convert to Catholicism and live in Rome as a patron of the arts. Christina was the only legitimate child of King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden and his wife Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. Her parents had previously suffered the stillbirth of a daughter and the death of another infant daughter, also named Christina. When their third child was born on December 18, 1626, attendants first thought that it was a boy, as the baby was covered in hair and had a strong, hoarse cry. But they soon realized their mistake. King Gustavus was joyous and remarked, "She will be clever, for she has made fools of us all." By all accounts, he was very fond of his daughter, and she admired him greatly. When Christina was just 6 years old, her father died in battle. Her mother suffered mental health problems and demanded that her husband's body remain unburied so that she could visit him. His open coffin was kept in the palace for 18 months until a chancellor finally told the royal guard to keep the Dowager Queen away and bury the king's corpse. Christina was now the undisputed monarch, but Sweden hadn't had a queen since Margrethe I of Denmark united all of Scandinavia in the 14th century. Technically, queens were not allowed, so at her coronation she was named king. Christina's mother had been indifferent to her only child, but once she was sovereign, Maria Eleonora became somewhat obsessed with her daughter. Before his death, King Gustavus, likely concerned about his wife's mental state, had written in his will that in the event of his death, Christina should be cared for by his sister, Catherine, with his brother Karl acting as regent. This did not suit Maria Eleonora, who tried to ban her in-laws from the castle. Officials had no choice but to exile the Dowager Queen and limit her access to her daughter. Christina thrived in the company of her aunt and her cousins and enjoyed a happy few years. But when she was 9 years old, her foster mother died, and the council appointed 4 different women to all be mother figures to the young queen. She did not become particularly attached to any of them. Christina was educated as a prince and reveled in learning. She had particular interest in religion, philosophy, mathematics, and alchemy, and spoke 8 languages. In a time when women were seen as intellectually inferior, one of her tutors said that she is not at all like a female, and that she had a bright intelligence. At 18, Christina's minority ended and she began ruling the Swedish Empire, though her coronation was postponed because Sweden was at war with Denmark. Sweden won the war and as a result controlled the Baltic Sea and had unrestricted access to the North Sea, greatly enriching the nation. Sweden was also involved in the 30 Years' War between Protestant and Catholic states throughout Europe. She pushed for a peace treaty to end the war. The Peace of Westphalia was signed in 1648 and added considerable territory to the Swedish Empire, expanding its power. Christina's closest friend was Ebba Sparre, known as La Belle Comtesse, the beautiful countess. The pair are thought to have been lovers. They shared a bed, and Christina bragged that Ebba's intelligence is as striking as her body. Christina showed little interest in most of her ladies-in-waiting, considering them to be vain and vapid. She mentioned them in writing only to compare herself as far more masculine than they. However, she did have a small inner circle which included Ebba, Jane Ruthven, and Louise von der Nuth. As she grew older, Christina was under mounting pressure to marry and produce an heir. Her first cousin, Charles, was infatuated with her, and she agreed to marry him before he left to serve in the Swedish army in Germany for 3 years. Christina revealed in her autobiography that she felt an insurmountable distaste for marriage and for all things that females talked about and did. Christina's passion for study was such that she only slept 3 to 4 hours a night and took to wearing men's clothes and shoes for convenience. She had no interest in spending hours dressing in fine gowns and having her hair done like other ladies of the court. Her tangled, unkempt hair became her trademark. She also grew facial hair, which led many at the time to suspect her of being intersex, though her doctor's journals and her memoirs refute this. It is now believed that she may have suffered from polycystic ovarian syndrome. She was also noted for her unladylike behavior, including slouching, cursing, crossing her legs, and speaking casually with both high and low-born people. From an early age, she had been fascinated with Catholicism and the celibate lives of nuns in particular. She read a biography of Queen Elizabeth I of England and was deeply impressed with the Virgin Queen's lifelong resistance to matrimony. At 23, Christina announced that she would never marry and named her cousin Charles as her heir. The nobility objected, but the rest of the country accepted her decision. In 1650, when the Queen was 24 years old, her coronation finally took place. She wore a fabulous white and gold embroidered gown, which was not really her style, but it fit the fashion of the time. She rode in a carriage draped in black velvet embroidered in gold and pulled by 3 white horses. She traveled the 6.5 miles from Jakobstad Castle to Stockholm Cathedral, and her procession was so long that when the first carriage arrived, the last carriage had not yet left. All 4 estates, nobles, clergy, burghers, and peasants were invited to dine at the castle. Fountains in the marketplace splashed out wine for 3 days, roast was served, illuminations sparkled, and parades celebrated the young queen's coronation. Christina was a patron of theater, mathematicians, scientists, and the arts. She commissioned nearly 1,000 paintings, sculptures, and other works of art, and purchased hundreds of books and manuscripts, including the Codex Gigas, the largest extant medieval illuminated manuscript in the world, also known as the Devil's Bible. She founded the Regular Mail Times, the oldest currently published newspaper in the world. Queen Christina surrounded herself with great thinkers of the time. French philosopher René Descartes came to her court, but the cold Swedish weather did not agree with him, and he died in Stockholm of pneumonia. Christina sought to make Stockholm the Athens of the North, and she spent extravagantly on these pursuits, nearly bankrupting the state and causing public unrest. The queen was incredibly open-minded about religion. She studied Hebrew and Islamic writings, but had been particularly fascinated with Catholicism since childhood. Lutheranism was the dominant faith in Sweden, and she blocked the clergy from introducing the Book of Concord, which defined correct Lutheranism versus heresy and would have imposed strict religious guidelines on the people. She smuggled 2 Jesuit scholars into the palace to educate and debate with her on the merits of the Catholic faith. After much consideration, Christina decided to convert to Catholicism, but she had to keep her new faith a secret as it was illegal in Sweden at the time. At the age of 26, after 20 years on the throne, working 10-hour days, Christina suddenly collapsed in the midst of a nervous breakdown. She called for a progressive French doctor to treat her, and rather than bloodletting, the common cure-all of the time, he prescribed sufficient sleep, warm baths, healthy meals, and that she take more pleasure in life. He also shared with her his collection of erotic sonnets, which Christina enjoyed very much. The queen took her doctor's orders to heart and decided to abdicate and leave Sweden. Her popularity had been waning due to her perceived wasteful ways. During the abdication ceremony, each piece of the regalia was removed from her one by one. She took the crown off herself, and in a simple white taffeta dress gave a tearful farewell speech and thanked everyone. One courtier said that she looked like an angel. Her cousin was crowned King Charles X Gustav later that day. Christina was granted several dominions, the income from which left her financially secure. She decided to move to Rome and sent most of her valuable books, paintings, statues, and tapestries there, leaving the Swedish treasury severely depleted. She had to journey through Denmark, Sweden's arch enemy, so she dressed in men's clothing and traveled incognito. She meandered through the continent for several months, being wined and dined by the good and the great of Catholic Europe. When she arrived in Rome, she was greeted by the Pope and a carnival in her name that lasted for 2 months. In the papal capital, the former queen reveled in her newfound freedom. She became an integral part of the theater and musical culture and continued to sponsor artists. Christina enjoyed relationships with French aristocrat Gabriele de Mortemar and Italian singer Angelina Giorgino. She was also close friends with sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini, but eventually word got back to Sweden that she had become a Catholic and she was cut off financially. In search of an influx of cash, Christina traveled to France, where she shocked and intrigued the court with her masculine appearance and unguarded speech. 18-year-old King Louis XIV was impressed and offered her French troops to take the Italian kingdom of Naples from the Spanish, on the condition that she grant it back to France upon her death. While staying in France, Christina discovered that one of her servants and possible lovers, Jean Munaldeschi, had been betraying her plans to take Naples to the Pope. She confronted him, and Christina's servants stabbed the traitor. He tried to run and was chased around the castle until he was finally dealt a fatal blow. Her servants advised her to cover up the execution, but the former queen took full credit as she saw the death sentence as her royal right to impart. However, her reputation was ruined, and many in France and Italy saw the act as barbaric. King Louis canceled the planned invasion of Naples, and Christina returned to Rome in disgrace. In 1660, King Charles X Gustav died, and his 5-year-old son became King Charles XI. Christina returned to Sweden as she assumed that if anything happened to young Charles, she would once again inherit the throne. But as she was now a known Catholic, this was impossible, and she was required to once again renounce her right to the throne. Throughout her time in Rome, she had continued to write passionate love letters to Ebba Spare, but Ebba's family prevented the lovers from meeting again while Christina was in Sweden. She returned to Rome and enjoyed many more happy years there. She continued to revel in the arts, music, and theater scene and wrote her autobiography. She founded Rome's first public theater in a former jail and allowed women to perform on stage in defiance of the Pope's orders. She also demanded that the Pope prohibit the custom of chasing Jews through the streets during carnivals, and declared that all Roman Jews were under her royal protection. Christina died at the age of 62 and is one of only 3 women buried in the Vatican grotto. The Pope described her as a queen without a realm, a Christian without faith, and a woman without shame. Her sexuality and androgyny has led to speculation that she may have been intersex, to the extent that her remains were exhumed and examined in 1965. However, the post-mortem and reports from her doctors in life make it likely that she was a physically typical female. She was a strong-willed woman who wasn't afraid to live life by her own rules. Happy Women's History Month! This video is part of a collaboration with several other YouTube history channels called Project Her Story. If you want to learn more about other great female leaders from history, check out the Project Her Story playlist linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.